Hello and welcome to this episode of our podcast, where we'll be discussing all things fast fashion. Presenting me today are my fellow nature nurturers, Judah Waugh, Molly Sheehy, and Rory O'Flaherty. On today's episode of the Nature Nurturers podcast, we are going to be talking about all things fast fashion. So let's get started.
Fast fashion is defined as inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. Fast fashion is so convenient and a lot of the time it is cheap, which seems fantastic. It also revolves around trends which can change every week to encourage young people especially to buy more. However, while it looks great from the point of view of the consumer, it has a toxic underbelly that people either are not aware of or choose to ignore. Some fast fashion brands include Penneys, Boohoo, Topshop and H&M, amongst countless others who constantly prioritize profits over the planet, as well as basic human rights, such as the right to a healthy work environment and fair wages. Later on this episode, we will discuss further the atrocities committed by these brands in pursuit of profit and the latest trends. Also, we will be joined by Emma Slade Edmondson, who will chat to us about her work and how we can create tangible things in the global fashion industry. But first, how can you identify a fast fashion brand? Are the brands quick to release styles and outfits in mass after they have been seen on the catwalk? Are the clothes poor quality? How long do they last? Are the clothes mass-produced and in large volumes on the shelves? Personally, these remind me of many mainstream shops on today's high street, but now let's dive deeper into the stories behind how your clothes are made.
While fast fashion clothing may not cost the consumer much, it comes at a high human cost. The real cost of a €5 t-shirt lies in low wages, dangerous working conditions, and misery brought on by the immense pressure of brands to churn out clothing for the lowest cost. The rapid growth of globalization since the 1980s has allowed large-scale companies to shift the bulk of their production to the developing world. To use up someone else's resources, there they can take advantage of lax regulations, as well as low labor and factory costs, which are at a fraction of those in Europe. Many fashion companies have stopped in-house production and instead have suppliers in developing countries manufacture for them.
In Ireland today, minimum wage is set at €10.20 per hour, but in many countries across Asia and South America, a worker earns far less than this for similar difficulty of work. In Bangladesh, a worker can expect 13 cents per day. In Vietnam, it's 26 cents. In Indonesia, it's 34 cents. In China, it's 44 cents. In Honduras, it's $1.31. So let's face it, they're not getting a fair wage for a fair day's work for that €5 t-shirt.
While Phil Knight, co-founder of the global sports firm Nike, has a net worth estimated by Forbes to be $49.9 billion as of this year. Stephen Person, the chairman of H&M, has an estimated net worth by Forbes of $22 billion as of this year. And Les Wexner, chairman of L Brands, which has holdings in Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie & Fitch, amongst many other profitable brands, has a net worth of $4 billion as of last year.
I think you get the picture, and the list goes on and on. The majority of these brands are run by very wealthy billionaires who are mostly white men, who have unimaginable financial freedom to endorse and indulge in luxury, while the garment workers of their businesses who are exploited in other countries are quite literally paid pennies. Many of these fashion brands will pretend they are woke, pretend they are fighting and tackling racism, sexism, and climate change, and pretend they care. Yet they have no problem exploiting entire communities of colour behind closed doors. Communities of colour bear the heaviest burden. Of the 74 million textile workers worldwide, 80% are women of colour.
Yet, some people still think slavery is gone, but modern-day slavery still exists. 14 million people are living in modern slavery today, roughly 3 times the population of the Republic of Ireland. Many in the Southern Hemisphere working in the supply chains for these Western clothing brands work 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, in horrible conditions on factory floors. In comparison, in Ireland today, the maximum number of hours that an employee should work in an average week is 48 hours, or an average of 9.5 hours per day. Many workers are not allowed to go on breaks or eat or to the bathroom, and many have reported sexual abuse against them. Whereas in Ireland today, workers are entitled to a 15-minute break when more than 4.5 hours has already been worked, and a 30-minute break when more than 6 hours has been worked.
In 2013 in Bangladesh, 1,130 people were killed when the garment factory complex Rana Plaza collapsed. Wasn't that a high human cost for that €5 t-shirt? Sweatshops do not alleviate poverty. Many are forced to work there and spend the majority of their paycheck on food for families. 1 in 5 children are in child labour, or approximately 5 students from every classroom in Mount Hawk. The majority of child labourers are found in Asia, the Pacific, and Africa. Oftentimes, children are trafficked into this work to pay off family debt.
But what is equally, if not more important, is the environmental impact of fast fashion.
The impact of fast fashion is sickening and it is an immediate global issue. In America, 85% of clothing ends up being thrown away. The fast fashion industry is the second biggest consumer of water and is responsible for 8 to 10% of the global carbon emissions, more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. It requires about 700 gallons of water to produce one shirt and 2,000 gallons to produce a pair of jeans. The time it takes for a product to go through the supply chain from design to manufacture to purchase is called lead time. This results in the fashion industry producing obscene amounts of waste. The environmental impacts of fashion are wide-ranging and include water, energy, and microplastics, notwithstanding the detrimental social impacts we have already outlined earlier. Overall, the fashion industry is the second largest polluter in the world. The oil industry is number 1. I know we have spent the first part of this podcast being all doomy and gloomy, but here is what we can do to change, and together we can create a willingness to change.
The fashion industry is a major water consumer. Huge quantities of fresh water are used for the dyeing and finishing processes for all of our clothes. For example, it can take up to 200 tons of fresh water for a ton of dyed fabric. Also, cotton needs a lot of water to grow. Up to 2,000 litres of water are needed to produce just 1 kilogram of cotton. This startling fact outlines the demands fast fashion has on water. 85% of the daily needs of water of the entire population of India would be covered by the water used to grow cotton in the country. Bear in mind that 100 million people in India do not have access to drinking water. What can we as consumers do about this? We can choose fibers with a low water consumption, such as linen or recycled fibers. If you have to buy cotton, try to make sure it is organic cotton.
One of the most common materials used in fast fashion is polyester. Polyester is essentially plastic. Fast fashion brands love this fabric because it's cheap and easy to produce and the garments do not last long. You see, polyester, because it is synthetic, makes you sweat a lot, so you have to wash it more and the fibers become loose and the garment quickly deteriorates. And then you have to go out and buy another one. Every time we wash a synthetic garment, for example, polyester or nylon, about 1,900 individual microfibers are released into the water and making their way into our oceans. Scientists have discovered that small aquatic organisms ingest those microfibers. These are then eaten by small fish, which are later eaten by bigger fish, which we as humans eat, therefore introducing plastics into our food chain. It is no surprise, therefore, that the sperm count is estimated to be at 0 by 2045 due to the increased ingestion of synthetic chemicals.
Fashion and waste accumulation. Clothing has clearly become disposable. As a result, we generate more and more textile waste. A family in the Western world throws away an average of 30 kilos of clothing each year. Only 15% is recycled or donated, and the rest goes directly to landfill or is incinerated. In fact, the amount of annual textile waste per year could fill up the whole of Sydney Harbour. Synthetic fibres such as polyester are plastic fibres, therefore non-biodegradable, and can take up to 200 years to decompose. Synthetic fibres are used in 72% of our clothing. However, 10% of all textile waste comes from the cutting floor, meaning that brands are not even designing proper patterns for their workers to cut out and make clothes, and so much perfectly good material is wasted.
Chemicals are one of the main components in our clothes. They are used during fiber production, dyeing, bleaching, and wet processing of each of our garments. The heavy use of chemicals in cotton farming is causing diseases and premature death among cotton farmers, along with massive freshwater and ocean pollution and soil degradation. Many areas situated near textile dyeing plants have reported chemicals in water supplies. In some cases, whole communities have become in danger of esophageal cancer.
The global fashion industry is generating a lot of greenhouse gases due to the energy used during its production, manufacturing, and transportation of the millions of garments purchased each year. Most of our clothes are produced in China, Bangladesh, or India, countries essentially powered by coal. This is the dirtiest type of energy in terms of carbon emissions. You may have heard fast fashion brands talking about how they're improving their environmental practices, such as H&M launching their Conscious range. This is known as greenwashing.
Every year, thousands of hectares of endangered and ancient forests are cut down and replaced by plantations of trees used to make wood-based fabrics such as rayon. The loss of forests is threatening the ecosystem and indigenous communities, for example, the Amazon rainforest. What can we do about it?
To help combat this problem and show that you are not accepting these abuses and only buy what you need. These brands rely on people in developed countries not being satisfied with what they already have. Download the app Good On You, which rates brands based on the labour, animal welfare, and environmental impacts to help you make the right choices and support sustainable brands. Also, there are so many videos on YouTube to show you how to mend and upcycle your clothes instead of buying new things, so use what you already have. And while buying second-hand is great, only buy what you need, because people who cannot afford to buy clothes from expensive sustainable brands are also depending on charity shops for clothes. Choose natural fibres. If you're going to buy new clothes, try to buy from Irish or non-sustainable brands.
That draws to conclusion the more information-heavy topic of this episode. First off, we hope you enjoyed listening to us, that you've learned something, and that you will say goodbye to fast fashion and make the change to a more sustainable tomorrow.
Now, unfortunately, we are currently living in the COVID-19 world, and due to restrictions imposed, Hugh and I were the only ones able to conduct our interview with today's guest, Emma Slade Edmondson, during school. But please do not let that dim your excitement levels, because she is an author, a podcaster herself, a Forbes 100 environmentalist. She has done TED Talks and is a champion of all things sustainable living. So it is my pleasure to welcome to our podcast, Emma Slade Edmondson.
Hi Emma, it is an honour to have you on our podcast today. For those of our listeners who don't know much about you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please, who you are and what sort of work you do?
Sure, thank you first of all for having me. So my name's Emma Slade Edmondson, and I work with brands or organisations that have some sort of desire to do social and environmental good. And I've been working in this space for over a decade. And over that time, because of the landscape of the kind of work I do, my work has changed a lot. And within my work, I end up working with lots of different people and lots of different organisations So for example, it could be that I'm working with charity brands and NGOs, or it could be that I'm working with fashion and lifestyle brands. So it's really quite varied, the work that I do. And even the type of work that I'm doing changes quite a lot. So for example, it could be producing campaigns. So you may be aware of campaigns I've done, such as Love Not Landfill, where it's been all about getting 16 to 24-year-olds into secondhand, and kind of to get people to look at secondhand as a first port of call for their fashion choices. And so, yeah, it could be something like that. Or then on the other side of it, it could be redesigning a charity shop to bring in that younger audience, and a sort of marketing campaign associated with that. Or, for example, it could be I've recently been working with a baby fashion rental brand, and that's more about the strategy behind helping people understand why that might be something that they should start looking into, because obviously it's such a new thing that the first hurdle is to kind of explain to people what it is, how it works, and it's then to go into why this might be a good thing, not just for their lifestyle but also for the environment. So yeah, there's lots of different bits to my work, and it's quite a broad scope.
Yeah, the secondhand like baby clothes, that makes so much sense, because babies just grow so fast and you just don't need the clothes anymore after a good while.
They grow so fast. They actually get through, I think it's 7 clothing sizes in 2 years is the average, so it's quite a lot.
Like it's crazy that people haven't been doing it before.
Yeah, it is when you think about it, and it's such a good solution. And this particular one that I'm working with, it's kind of like a basis for baby's wardrobe. So it's not that you wouldn't obviously have like granny or granddad or whomever buying you like those special dresses for Sunday or whatever, or for special occasions and for when you really want your kid to look really spruced up. But this is more like a capsule wardrobe, I suppose, that you would have.
What motivated you to choose a career you have chosen as an activist, and specifically, why would you work in sustainable fashion?
It's an interesting question, actually, because I would say that my work and what I'm drawn to tends to be really motivated by what I think will have greatest impact, and sort of seeing problems and problem solving. So when I first started working in fashion, sorry, that's my doorbell. When I first started working in fashion, I was just becoming more and more aware of the problematic nature of the industry, and everything that was impactful both to people and the planet in terms of the industry itself. And I think I was then moved to look for options that would be less impactful and that would maybe turn the dial on that. And so it's always been a natural evolution, and the work that I've done has always kind of been seeing a problem and then moving to the solution, I would say.
Yeah. Moving on a small bit. With the increasing influence that social media has on young people, there seems to be an increasing trend among young people that they can't be seen to be wearing the same outfit at different parties on social media, therefore making buying cheap fashion clothes more desirable. What we'd like to know, is this a problem in England, and how do you think we would go about promoting amongst young people that second-hand clothes and wearing an outfit more than once is actually cool?
That's a big one. So yeah, first of all, it definitely is a problem in England. I think it's 1 in 3 16 to 24-year-olds wouldn't wear an outfit more than once on social media, is a stat that I recently had from Hubbub, who do these surveys in the UK. And I think, yeah, it's like 36% of 16 to 24-year-olds, something like that figure, would feel unfashionable were they to rewear an outfit. So yeah, it's definitely still an issue, but I think it's something that the dial has been moved on with work like the work we talked about with Love Not Landfill and many other kind of campaigns, and also platforms and ways to kind of find fashionable secondhand clothing, like Depop. You know, I guess you guys are probably familiar with Depop and use things like that. But yeah, to the second point of your question, do you mind repeating it for me again?
Oh yeah, certainly. Um, Amongst young people, how do you think we would go about promoting that wearing second-hand clothes and wearing an outfit more than once is cool?
Yeah, I think it's a show and tell vibe. You know, one of the big pieces of work that I did really early on in my career in this space was called Charity Fashion Live, and it was all about recreating London Fashion Week looks in real time as they came out on the catwalk, it using only what we could find in a single charity shop. And so for me, that was kind of, I did that because I felt it was the greatest proof that, you know, you can find something that's on trend secondhand. You know, if I can find it immediately in the moment, as soon as this thing comes out on the catwalk in a shop, you know, at random, then we can find those incredible pieces secondhand. And there's no reason why they can't be just as fashionable as literally the trend that's just appeared, you know, moments ago. So I think it's definitely opening that dialogue, encouraging people to give it a go, to try and to look and to lean into what I like to call style rather than fashion. Style is about what you do with clothes and how you work with them and your prowess in how you pull things together, whereas fashion is copycatting. And I think, although with that piece of work that we've just talked about, I was kind of taking from what you see on the catwalk, it's about making it your own, and you know, working with what you've already got is the most sustainable way of doing fashion, doing clothing, doing style. And so I think, yeah, it's really about demonstrating and sharing, you know, and making sure that we communicate how proud we are and how happy we are with wearing secondhand to our friends if we are in fact into that, and this stuff spreads.
I completely agree with you that the dial is turning. It's like now you're just seeing so many like young people as well, like on TikTok or on YouTube, like thrift flipping clothes and just making their own things out of what they already have. Even though they might just be making like styles that are on trend at the moment, but it's I think it's still a great step, and the dial is definitely turning on it.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the way that the resale market has grown, I think it's like 20 times faster than the fashion retail market in at large, over the last few years. You'll have to go and look up that stat exactly yourselves, because I'm not sure if I'm butchering it a little bit, but that's the general premise of it is, yes, like the dial has turned, things have changed, things have moved on, but there's still work to be done. And I do believe that the more we can share our joy in doing better for both the people and planet by making these choices and choosing secondhand first, for example, as a really easy one, yeah, the more we can change things.
Yeah, kind of on the same line as well as that. How do you think we close the gap between the intention of switching to a more sustainable life and actually acting on it and permanently switching to buying secondhand or renting or even mending clothes?
Yeah, I think it starts with, it's two-pronged. I think, you know, there's been a huge focus on citizens, or consumers, whichever word you prefer to use, and what we can do. And I think it still sits with us because there's a huge mindset shift that needs to happen, and that's kind of how we close the gap. It's about that collective mindset in terms of how we approach things, having this moving away from more being the focus, moving away from fast being the focus, and moving more into like a slowness, a more considered approach, a thoughtful approach to fashion and style, and consumption at large. And then the second thing is we're really now at a stage where it's about legislation, and government, and pushing for that legislation that helps us as your everyday person to live in a different way. And I think we have got to a place where that is imperative. But I think that we as citizens, we have so much more power, I think, than people realize to push that dial forward, and to make our needs heard and our desires heard. And so I think that that's where it kind of starts.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because like the more people who want to change this, they've like politicians will want to get elected because they want to do what the people want. So if more people decide that this is what they want, then the politicians are much more likely to make just legislation towards it.
Exactly that, yeah.
And another question that we have that I've been like wondering about for so long is most of what young people wear is usually activewear, and it's understandable that most people don't want to get those secondhand, but lots of sustainable activewear brands aren't exactly cheap. And like, are there any brands that you'd recommend for young people who probably be on a budget, or what do you feel is the best solution to this?
So I am gonna go right back to where we began. I know this is probably not the answer you're looking for, but I think the best place to get activewear is secondhand platforms. You know, like the best activewear, in my opinion, is that stuff that is retro, that stuff that is you know, an original. And so, you know, places like Depop, eBay, I genuinely think, and obviously when we can be out in the world and we can actually go into secondhand shops, that for me is like where you find the golden grail and the coolest bits of activewear. So that would always be my first port of call for if it's specifically activewear as well, because you can kind of search for what you're looking for as well if it's activewear, because it's going to be those brands that, you know, whatever it is that you're into. So yeah.
Thank you. Also, through your activism work on social media and on your website, as well as your work with charity shops, etc., has feedback from people been more positive or negative about learning about fast fashion and buying secondhand or renting clothes more regularly?
Yeah, I would say overwhelmingly positive. People have responded so well, and I think that they've responded well from the beginning. I think that people really want to learn more and want to be empowered to do more. And I think that for too long, you know, because of the way fashion as an industry operates, that information hasn't been available. And so yeah, I think people are kind of been chewing at the bit to get more information. And even, for example, on the flip side of it, when I was doing Charity Fashion Live and we were recreating London Fashion Week looks from designers, even the designers, because we did this all on social media, even the designers would tweet us saying like, we know you'll do us proud, you know, we're excited to see what you're going to do this year, you know. So I think that really, when that started to happen, I began to see that there's a real potential for people in different factions and on different sides of the coin to come together and move forward on this. So yeah, I would say that it's been really positive.
That's extremely hopeful. It's so nice to hear that it's overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, the change is coming. Yeah. As we are all aware, the global fashion industry is a formidable force with a toxic underbelly. What do you think is the best way to disrupt it and finally see fashion brands using more environmentally and socially sustainable practices into the future?
That's such a big question. I think, again, it's multi-pronged. I think for the purpose of this conversation, you are the most important disruptors because you're the future. You are the future buyers, consumers, citizens that are going to be potentially considering whether or not you want to purchase the items that the fashion industry are putting out. And so, you know, one of the most important ways to disrupt what is currently going on is for you to continue doing this work that you're doing here and sharing with your friends and your counterparts, and helping people understand why you voting with your wallet, as it were, and raising your voices and using your voices to let these fashion brands know what you want, and what you, more importantly, what you don't want, is a really important disruption.
Yeah. And then kind of following on a bit from that as well, what do you think is the biggest hurdle to change? And are you hopeful for the future that we might finally see real tangible change, not just hashtags and empty promises like today?
Yes, I definitely am hopeful. I think that we are probably, well, we are not moving fast enough, but we are moving. We move, still we move. But yeah, that definitely there needs to be more speed with which the wheels are turning, which is why I think now we're at this juncture where we have to lean into pushing government to change legislation, and that's where we can speed up the process. And I think that that will facilitate things happening quicker. But I think, yeah, I do feel positive because having been in this space for well over a decade, I see and feel the change. You know, when I first started in this space, people would actually ask me, like, what does sustainability mean? Why do you do this? What's the point? You know, people were absolutely baffled initially as to what it was that I did, why I was doing it. And I have to say, like, the landscape's changed so much, you know, even just to be invited onto a podcast with you, and for you to tell me that you've got, you know, this group, Nature Nurturers, and that you are you're doing this work in school is incredible to me, because when I first started, that would just not have been a thing. So the landscape has changed, and as we've said, we've talked about how the resale market has burgeoned and grown. You know, we've talked about how you know, the campaigns and the work that I've done, I've largely seen success in, and you know, a lot of people your age and sort of like in their 20s know about these campaigns and, you know, speak positively about secondhand, and that for me is, yeah, is really, really positive.
And just like one last question, um, you know how um, one of the most important things now is for the focus to shift to politicians to make legislation to stop the harmful practice that is fast fashion. Um, do you think that fast fashion brands should be allowed to switch to more sustainable practices, or completely disband, like after all the suffering that they've inflicted on people, or do you think that that's unrealistic?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's not a simple answer, because I think that you know, if we were to sit down and group brands, we wouldn't probably necessarily be able, it wouldn't be as simple as saying, let's put all the bad ones on one side and let's put all the good ones on the other side, because the nature of fashion and fashion production and supply chain is complex. And, you know, very often the old-fashioned model means that you're getting things from lots of different places to build your final piece. You may be using different suppliers. You know, there's so many different moments in the process where there could be something where you could point to and say, do you know what, that's not to my ethical standard. And so I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh right, well, we'll just disband all the bad ones and we'll keep the good ones. I think that, as with anything in business, it might be that if you have a company who fundamentally is doing things in a harmful way, then it needs to be completely, what's the word? Restructured. Good, thank you. I kept on having the word rejigged in my mind, and I was like, that's not very professional, Emma, that's not what you're looking for. But yeah, restructured, and like their entire process and business culture and mindset just be overhauled and reset. But yeah, it really would be on a case-by-case basis, I would say. And I think that, you know, we have to have models where there's a journey. If we just cut everything dead all the time, how would we know that things could be made better, that things could be turned around? What blueprint would we have to say, you know, you can do this, it's been proven? And by no means am I saying that businesses and organizations should not be suitably punished, put under pressure, and you know, reprimanded is the wrong word because it somehow doesn't sound quite harsh enough, but held to account for, you know, ills that have been done. But yeah, I guess I just don't feel it's as simple as saying, right, we've got the good ones, we've got the bad ones, let's just get rid.
Thank you for such a thorough and extremely a great response. Thank you so much. No, unfortunately, Emma, that is all we have time for. That's all we have time for with you today. But before we go, how can our listeners best follow the work that you do?
Oh, well, you can follow me on Instagram at Emma Slade Edmondson. And I obviously have a website, so there are actually case studies on some of the work that I've done, which might be interesting if you wanted to kind of geekily delve into, again, the problem and solution side of things, which is kind of outlined in some of those case studies and some of the clients that I've worked with, the brands that I've worked with. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the best ways to find me if your interest specifically in my work is sustainable fashion. As I say, I do have a podcast, but that's a slightly different topic.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a million for coming on. You go to the top here.